morning, everybody. I remain Jason Grumet with the Bipartisan Policy Center. It is a real pleasure to be partnering with the Baker Center and Marian Wanamaker and her team on today's event. And if I can just set the stage a little bit, you might think there are a lot of reasons why we're here. It's a very kind of on-brand idea, but there's really only one reason we are here. And that reason is Howard Baker, quite literally. Right? The Baker Center would be an awkward institution had it not been for Howard Baker. And Senator Baker was, in fact, one of the 4 Senate Majority Leaders who came together to found the Bipartisan Policy Center. So it is literally true that neither of our organizations would exist if it were not for the spirit and leadership and I just think accomplishment of Howard Baker. And I just want to, I was thinking about the senator and just wanted to share a couple of things that stuck with me working with him over the years. I remember once asking Senator Baker, why was it better? Why were you all able to fight one day and work together the next day and get things done for the country? And his response was, we all fought in the war together, which reflects something that we've all understood for a long time, which is, you have to have relationships. You have to have some imagination, some capacity of empathy and trust if you're going to have a good fight and still find opportunities to be together. And we spend a lot of time at the BPC trying to think about how we foster and forge those relationships among the members of Congress who really do want to work together. Senator Baker also said to me once, Jason, I've never met anybody who's 100% wrong. I've met people who are 80% wrong, which is really, really wrong. But if you really step back, you can usually find some place to start a conversation. And the third thing he said, which metaphorically, of course, is the essence of this podcast, is you might be right. That, to me, also says a lot about the senator, because that really describes both his humility and his confidence. You might be right, but you're sure going to have to convince me. And you're going to have to bring argument and evidence and substance and passion to that discussion. And there are no 2 better people to extend this legacy than Governors Bredesen and Haslam. Just a brief word of introduction, though probably not necessary. Governor Bredesen ran the great state of Tennessee from 2003 to 2011. As he has always been known, he brought a lot of fiscal responsibility to the state, focused a great deal on issues around children's health. He was also a charter member of the Bipartisan Policy Center's Governor's Council. So we've had great opportunities to work with Phil over the years. Governor Bill Haslam took over from 2011 to 2019, focused a lot on education reform, really sweeping programs that have had tremendous effect on the state. Also did a lot to strengthen the balance sheet, and as a result, brought forward the largest tax cut in Tennessee history. Now, Governor Bredesen claims that was actually all his doing, creating the momentum for the money that Bill got all the credit for, but that's how it goes. So just closing up, the one other kind of memory I have clearly from Senator Baker was that he always told us that policy was about real people. You have to communicate with people and engage people and listen to people, and you also have to have the evidence to have a good fight. And so that's really the core idea of the work that we are now moving forward with in partnership with the Baker Center. It's figuring out how to develop that evidence together and how to bring it to Washington so that you can have a constructive disagreement that eventually moves policy forward. Before I turn it over, I have one disclaimer. We apparently decided to have the ambition of serving a Tennessee barbecue lunch. I always try to make sure that we use the kind of highest, best comparative advantage of the Bipartisan Policy Center. We understand our audience. We stay in our lane. I hope we did okay. I fear that this may not conjure the essence of Tennessee barbecue. For those of you who know about it, just please be kind. So now, a real pleasure to turn it over to CNN's senior White House correspondent, Phil Manningly, to lead the discussion.
Thanks so much. Very savvy expectation setting there. That is a veteran move. Thanks everybody for being here. Governors, thanks so much for doing this. This is the irony that a cable news correspondent is moderating this panel is not lost on me. But I will say the draw of this is, as you guys know, my in-laws are from Tennessee, and I'm in a constant battle to become the favorite son-in-law. And they both like you quite a bit. I think you might be the only Democrat that my in-laws have ever liked, Governor Bredesen. I want to start by kind of in a similar vein with Senator Banker. When I was a cub reporter, brand new, working at Congressional Quarterly years ago, my first editor made me read Senator Baker's 1998 Senate leadership speech, which I think you guys could probably read in the project, and it would hit the exact goals you have. But the quote that's kind of the genesis for this project, if we could cue that up.
In politics, competition for ideas, competition for the right to serve is fundamental and is political. But it must be accompanied by a decent respect for the other fellow's point of view. Because if you don't do that, the whole system falls. It collapses. If you don't admit that the other person may be right from time to time.
It's a good line. What struck me in listening to it and knowing Senator Banker and also knowing your guys' work, there's nuance there, right? It's not kumbaya, everybody loves one another. It's not that we're all going to hold hands and agree on everything. There's going to be a fight. There will be partisan positions and there won't be agreement on everything. But there's at least an understanding that motives are on the positive side. Walk me through the motivation behind putting this project together.
Right. Well, you know, we have some differences. Phil's way older than I am. He's a Democrat, I'm a Republican. You know, there's some differences, but we share some similarities. We both had a business background. We were both mayors. We were both governors. And we both believe that this stuff really matters. That what's lost in all the conversation today is that the reason you get elected is to actually solve problems. That's the whole idea, is to solve problems. And yet there's no premium for solving problems today, right? There's actually a disincentive. Because solving a problem is, as Senator Baker said in the quote, it means you got to listen to the other side, which means you might have to give in a little something. Now all of a sudden, you know, you're a Republican in name only, or whatever they call moderate Democrats, and now you're in bad territory. And I think this is our attempt to say we can just keep running to our corners on these hard issues, or we can say, listen to both sides a little bit and see if there's some practical solutions we can move toward.
It was great. I would add to that just the notion that I certainly learned as governor. When I was mayor, it's a nonpartisan job, and the city council is a nonpartisan council. And so you put together different coalitions around different subjects. It wasn't broken down by party lines. And what I found as governor was you've got some difficult problems. And I started out with huge problems with our Medicaid system. The answers really involved picking and choosing and taking a little bit from some very different points of view. I mean, there were some conservative points of view. So it's not in my mind only about compromise and getting things done. It's also about getting to the best answer. And it's one of the reasons why I thought this was a thing that I'm really interested in doing.
Yeah, I want to jump off that because we can go through. You guys have 8 episodes teed up right now. The topics are gun violence, climate, healthcare, budget, education. Really the central flashpoint issues on the policy side of things that we talk about in this town. Often we talk about around the country. But what I was struck by when I was listening to kind of the rough edits, I feel like a Grateful Dead fan who's got like bootleg copies of things, was that there was an intellectual curiosity in the approach. And it was actually people taking the time to not just listen, but learn, too, which I feel like is very lost sometimes here. How were you thinking through that as you approached each episode?
Yeah, I think we made the decision early on to not include people who were currently elected officials, feeling that there's lots of pressures on that group to just, kind of conform. I mean, both of us know that when you deviate from whatever the catechism is of your party on stuff, there's a lot of consequences, to that. So, but really wanted to talk to people who were former elected officials, people who had some experience of being in this particular area, and tried to structure it around. What's the question we really should be trying to solve here? We had an issue on climate change, and the question is not, is it real or not? The question is to simply say, here's what's happening. What are the things we can do about it that have got some practical, some practical and some reasonableness about them.
Yeah. So, an example would be we have Al Gore on the climate change issue. And so what I asked him is, Al, here, I think climate change is real. I'm not denying that. My fear is that the issue is going to be a little bit like we were during COVID, where we said, so we had some people like, let's just shut everything down. And we're now seeing the price that, particularly in education. So help me know that if we don't say, we don't have the same type of approach to climate change that says, well, the best thing is we're gonna not worry about any of the other consequences. So we tried to ask those type of practical questions to people who have very definitive ideas on things.
Now, I want to pull up something from the former vice president, not necessarily from a substance side of things, but also the tone and tenor of the sound that I want to play right now, because I think it gives people a sense of the actual type of conversation you were having. Take a listen.
The name of this podcast is You Might Be Right. Senator Baker had a famous saying that I've quoted a lot. And he said, always remember the other fella might be right, in his Huntsville, Tennessee colloquial way of saying things. Can you think of a time when, in the middle of this discussion, you've heard a perspective from someone else that you thought, okay, that's a better way to look at this, or they have a point? Can you give us your example of the other fella might be right?
Well, yeah, there have been several times where I've had that realization, Bill, absolutely. I'll give you a couple of quick examples. For decades, there was a debate about whether we needed to focus mainly on adaptation to the impacts of the crisis or instead focus on trying to prevent the crisis. And my view back in the day was we don't need to divert our attention from trying to prevent this with all this work on adapting to it. But I've changed my view on that because we have to do both. I'll give you another quick example. I used to be very strongly in favor of ethanol, growing alcohol fuels on farmland. When I was a congressman in the old 4th District, I had a big workshop and I've always promoted that. Well, I came to realize that the energy balance and the cost, actually, that doesn't make sense, but it's very popular. And I thought it made sense. And then after I realized that the other guy said to the other guy, you might be right. And then I checked the numbers and they were right. I changed my position, but it was so popular by then, and it still is. If you campaign in Iowa, you're going to find out how popular it is.
I think one of the biggest things you could do for climate change is to not have an early presidential primary in Iowa.
No comment.
I appreciate the no comment there. But along those lines, first off, we all kind of set our stopwatches in the primaries of when every candidate, particularly those who talk about fiscal restraint or against subsidies, will eventually back ethanol when they're campaigning in Iowa. But that idea of finding issues where you actually change your mind. You recognize that in the course of these conversations, all right, that's a pretty good idea. Do you have good examples from these 8 episodes or from these conversations that you've had where you individually have said, wow, I hadn't thought of it like that. I like that. That's a good idea.
I have one related actually to that particular podcast. The other individual we had was Jeff Lyash, who is the CEO of TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, which is the biggest public utility in the country. It's a huge utility. And the idea, by the way, behind that was to say they both believe in climate change. This wasn't a plus or minus, but one of them, Al Gore, is a passionate, serious, take no prisoners. This is an existential issue. And the other, Jeff Lyash, is a very smart guy who also has to provide you power and to operate your washing machine and keep your home heated and so on, and to bring that practical aspect. But we talked during that thing about the idea of these small modular reactors, which we talked about, something that I had always been opposed to, stuff. And he got me, I won't say hard changed my mind, but he got me very much thinking that I might be wrong on that, and it was an area that needed some more discussion. Not that I have anything to do with it anymore, but I walked away from that thing with a very different view of what role they might play.
Yeah, interestingly, one of the episodes we have is on charter schools, and I'm a huge charter school advocate. I think the data is all there to support it. But one of our guests was Kaya Henderson. Kaya used to be the superintendent of the D.C. school system. So listening to somebody who was the superintendent of a large public system in a very diverse setting, and she didn't, by the way, she didn't think charter schools were bad, but she said, here's some pros and here's some cons, what it looked like in her chair. To me, it was really helpful. And again, that's kind of the point, is to try to listen to this from the chair of where somebody else is sitting. Because I think all of us recognize, where you sit defines where you stand on so many issues.
What's success for you guys with this? Besides being the #1 rated pod
Yeah,
on iTunes.
I don't think there's any danger of that. Nobody needs to worry about their backside on that. I think for this is, if some, obviously, we hope we affect leaders, people in elected office, but even more than that, leaders reflect what's going on out here. And one of the things that politicians, that defines us too, you're really good at reading the room. And the room right now feels angry and mad. And I want somebody on my side who's going to fight the other side. And if we can have the people who are actually living in the middle of this country, most of whom, by the way, are just worried about getting their kid to soccer practice and getting back and, getting homework done and going to bed that night, if we can help them understand, oh, wow, there is another side to that argument. I'm not going to change my view on that. If I'm pro-life, I'm still pro-life or whatever, but I do understand the other side of that better.
I think, I look at this, the audience of this is probably first of all people who are involved in government in some way now, in elective office or appointed office, since it's, it's not designed to be, have 2 million subscribers or something like that. I just believe that, there's lots of people in political office, for example, who are, who are selfish about it. They're in there for the reason of they like the perks and they're going to do whatever it takes to stay elected and keep their base excited and happy. I also think, though, there's a lot of people who really are trying to do the right thing. They're in it for the right reason. They want to make a change. They may feel trapped in some ways into a system that doesn't reward or even permit that kind of motion. And part of the idea is just maybe give them an example of here's some ways of going about this and how you might think about this. And there actually are other people who genuinely want to solve problems and are trying to do it. So I think if you just plant it, if all we do is plant a seed with some of those people, I'll consider it great.
I think one of the other things is, being out of office does allow you a lot of perspective benefit. In your office, people ask you, what do you think about this? And the truth is, you don't know. You're wrestling your own alligators. But when you get out, you get a little perspective. And one of those things is that you're a limited time there. Do the right thing. Somebody said, what's the difference in now and 100 years from now? All new people. And 100 years from now, nobody except potentially my great-great-grandchildren will know I was governor or care, okay? So in the meantime, while you're there, do the right thing. Because if you're doing it for your place in history or because you got this many followers on Twitter, it's going to wear out pretty quick. And even 10 years from now, you're not going to care.
Can I ask you, when you talk about individuals who feel trapped, you're clearly referring to the former governors who are now senators, who I don't even think I'm breaking news by saying feel that way every single day, which makes me wonder why you even weighed the possibility of joining that chamber. But it's interesting because, and I'm sure this will get me in trouble for even saying it, but Lamar Alexander, Bob Corker, Paul Ryan, these are individuals who I have great respect for as human beings, as well as their approach to government. They're no longer there, right? They left. And with the exception of perhaps Senator Alexander, who obviously had an extraordinarily lengthy career, Corker and Ryan certainly fall in the category of people that didn't need to leave. They had decades more if they wanted it. Are you concerned that, given the current state of affairs, that people who are there for the right reasons are leaving because of the current tone and tenor?
I'll go first. I'm concerned that the current political environment rewards people who are performative in nature and who understand how to play, like I said, to get the likes and the retweets, et cetera, and aren't nearly as incentivized to solve a problem. And if you ask them like that, That's what concerns me. Is it's our politics have become performative, and that's not a good way to solve problems.
I'm actually, I think people leave for a lot of different reasons, and some of them may be that they just get discouraged with trying to make things happen. But I also think, a part of the original idea of the Congress was people who took some small part of their lives and used it in the public sector in that way and went up and came back. And I remember Lincoln was a brief member of Congress, and the notion of somebody going to the Congress and coming home again in 2 or 4 years just is not happening today. So I really like the idea of encouraging people who are of substance, who have demonstrated some success in whatever area of their life in the larger world they were involved in, coming to Washington for a while, trying to do some good, and then just saying, I'm perfectly willing to leave this and go home. And I know both of them. I know Senator Corker much better, more contemporary, but I think that's kind of where he is. Where he was I did this for 12 years. I enjoyed it. Time for something else.
Yeah, there were fewer more impatient individuals in the U.S. Senate than Bob Corker, and I say that respectfully.
That's fair.
One thing, I guess I would say this. When you go back through the episodes that you guys have taped, who was your favorite guest and why? And I know I'm asking you to pick children here, but go ahead, because we all have our favorites. I'm kidding. If my kids are watching, I don't.
Again, we're always so pleased that people take time to come do it. I'm going to pick a guy. You are asking me to pick children now. Let's start thinking through this.
Who made you think the most?
Well, Jeff Lash, because of his job running TVA, and Jeff is a climate change believer. We've got an issue that we have to address, and here's how we're doing it. But the data that he was bringing to the decisions he was making was really impressive to me.
I had a couple. One of them was Jeff Lash. We agree with that. And I think it was a matter of, here's somebody, they're the head of a huge utility. They're very successful and so on. And just bringing a kind of perspective about, okay, there's a lot of talk about this. How does it really work? I mean, what really are the choices you have to make here was really helpful to me. There was on the gun violence one, there was his last name was French. David French, who was the conservative who was that. And, I'm a Democrat and, but he really, he was the first person I talked to who had what I thought was an intelligent, well-reasoned set of arguments about why you don't want to go too far in the direction that Democrats are going. It kind of opened my eyes a little bit to say, look, you don't have to be crazy and sit around in a T-shirt on the front porch with a shotgun or something to be somebody who thinks that you don't need to go too far down this road.
I did last night we just actually at the Baker Center taped Lamar Alexander and Bob Corker together. Now, two Republicans.
I would pay money to listen to that.
You don't have to. Yeah, you're going to get it free.
No, I get it for free. I'm very excited about that.
Coming soon to your own phone. But Lamar is very this is on the filibuster, which is obviously a hot topic. Lamar is very pro-filibuster and thinks that making big decisions is going to impact the whole country should be really hard. Bob thinks, hey, it's gotten so hard that all the decision making has gotten, so now the Supreme Court's making the decision about abortion and the president's making the decision about student debt relief because it's gotten so hard that the water has flowed to different channels. So that was a really fun conversation to hear the two of them.
When you look right now, obviously there are plenty of anecdotes you can point to about why everything's terrible.
Yeah.
Right? And this is as bad as it could be, and maybe not super familiar with the time of the Civil War, but generally I understand. Right. However, if you look on Capitol Hill over the course of the last 6 or 7 months, there's actually been some pretty significant bipartisan work that's gotten done. And that thrills me as somebody who loves the institution, but I'm intrigued why you think that is, and if you think that that is a better barometer of where things might be headed than perhaps what we see every single day on Twitter or in the campaigns or in primaries.
Well, if Lamar was sitting here, he would argue there's two Washingtons. There's the ones you see at the news at night, and there's the others where things like the CHIPS Act and the the 4 or 5 significant pieces of legislation that passed this year are happening. He would argue that. I take that as a slight sign of encouragement, but I don't know that I'm overwhelmingly encouraged that it's changed the whole tone and tenor of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, I've watched that, and I've been particularly with what I'm doing interested in climate change, kinds of issues, and I've got mixed feelings about it. Yes, they accomplished some things. How effective were they? You kind of get a C on that, but maybe that's the reality of how you get things done. So you have to remember. I think of this problem we're going through in the country and what's going on in Washington and our former president as a symptom of the problem, not as the cause of the problem. I mean, I think there's some deep cultural things going on in the country, either with a lot of people feeling that the mechanisms are not working for them, and that people in Washington are in many ways reflecting that. It's not only this country, it's obviously going on in a number of EU countries, for example, this kind of thing. I don't take too much comfort out of the fact that we're able to get a few things done here in this past year. I think it's great, but I think there's a much deeper cultural issue that has to be addressed, and probably takes a president to do it.
Oh.
I think setting a set of expectations which are different from sort of whatever the party catechism is at the moment. I mean, I certainly was a supporter of and an admirer of Barack Obama. I thought he missed a huge opportunity in the first 6 months of his term to kind of set a different standard for how these things are doing, and instead acted too much like a super senator and not enough like somebody in a very different job. And it's a criticism from love. I mean, I liked him, I supported him, and so on. I think it takes someone at that level, either that or some huge problem and crisis in the U.S. If you remember, I mean, during the Depression, we were a very divided country. Remember, Father Coughlin was practically a fascist and had a much larger following than any of these people do today. And really, what fixed that? Say it was World War II. I mean, suddenly the country has something to focus on, something as a common element, and I hope it doesn't take something like that in this country. But I really think it's going to take some major move like that. But that doesn't mean. I mean, both of us. You heard the backgrounds. I mean, we're both business people, and then in jobs where you actually have to do stuff on Monday morning, and so I mean, we're both in the category of saying we're not going to sit here. We're going to put an oar in the water and try to figure out how to make some contribution to this problem, and that's really what this podcast is all about.
Why, Governor Haslam, why do you think people care so much right now about politics? Right, like to Governor Bredesen's point, you have something to do on Monday morning. Growing up, most people they paid attention right about now in the lead up to a midterm. They obviously cared during the presidential. And maybe it's just the sphere in which I live, but people are far more interested in whatever the inflammatory issue is of the moment than I feel like normal human beings should be.
I think, and I guess I'd make a little bit of argument that the people on both sides are passionately interested. If you look at the number of tweets, like 80% of them are the far right, the far left, Russian agents, or bots. I mean, literally, that's true. And so we sometimes kid ourselves into thinking that everybody is wrapped up in this the way the highly involved are. And I'm not so certain that's true. I do think, though, I'd concede your point that there are a lot of folks who think, well, the answer to the issues of my life are political answers, and if my side can win, then all those will go away. And I think some of that is out of a real basis of fear. I think there's just way more of us living a fear-based life than was true 100 years ago. I could be wrong, but that's my bet.
And I just add to that. I mean, remember, we're wired for tribalism. I I mean, it's, you know, in the same way that we get overweight because our 100,000-year-old genes like things that are not what you should be eating today. I mean, I think that goes through all sorts of other areas of our thing. I mean, we are tribalists. I mean, we're designed when we feel pressure to think of we got insiders and we've got outsiders. And I think some people have gotten very good at manipulating that particular kind of weakness in the way we think about things, and that's part of the problem.
Just to be clear, Tennessee barbecue has no calories, right? That is actually, that's science.
And,
I'm almost positive.
and it's very close to a paleo diet as well. That's
actually true. But the reason why I asked the last question was to kind of bring it back to the actual project that you guys are working on itself. It's, you almost, maybe I'm just a huge nerd, but you almost kind of take a breath about 5 minutes in and think like, oh, all right, like I can sit here and listen to this for a little bit and learn and pick some stuff up. And not have to immediately decide like, I'm for this, I'm against this, this is terrible, this person's awful. Is that kind of how you were thinking about it from the start? Like the genesis of the idea itself, how did you guys map out how to do this? Or is it just purely organic?
Well, a little bit. We've been having some conversations around this, and then the Baker Center, obviously, but again, the quote they played from Senator Baker saying, you know, partisanship is not bad. I mean,
Right.
that's the marketplace of ideas. That's where they compete and work out. But if you go into that with my only objective is to win, then you're going to end up in the wrong place. I mean, and now it's more about winning. You know, if you're a conservative, why he really, you know, owned the libs with that tweet or whatever it is. If that's the objective, then we're not going to get to the best answer. And again, I think it was the inspiration of Senator Baker and both of us kind of coming from that mindset.
I agree with that, and I think we came at it from the standpoint of, you know, let's listen to these. We kind of put our own, we all have views on these issues. Going to put it aside a little bit. This is about trying to understand and listen. I would just emphasize, I said at the beginning here, but I just really think it's not only about getting things done through compromises, it's about getting the right answer. I mean, if you look at the Supreme Court. I mean, some of the most interesting and valuable stuff that has ever happened there have been the dissents. I mean, these dissenting views that have come out, and which really, in many ways, point the way toward the future, and really begin to crystallize some of these issues that you know, that exist. And I feel the same way about a lot of things in politics. That if we're going to do it right. It's not just about compromise. It's about hearing those dissents and finding, finding things that come from maybe other parts of the political spectrum, which you can use to further the things that are important to you.
I'm going to take some questions from the audience in a minute, but I do want to kind of take one pause and say, can you guys talk about Senator Baker as somebody who read a lot about him and kind of viewed him as what the Senate was supposed to be, but for folks who may not be as familiar?
Well, I came late to it. I first met Senator Baker when he was ambassador to Japan, and I was governor, and I went there for something, and he was very kind to me and spent some real time after a reception they had at the embassy to talk, and his wife was there with him at the time. And then following that, when he came back, I went up to Huntsville one day and spent a day with him. And it really was, for me, as simply, I mean, that's the sum total, you know, probably 12 hours of time I've spent with him. But it was really a learning experience for me. I mean, you're talking to somebody who's really been there and done that. I mean, it's not just studied it or written about it or anything else. And I really came to admire him, and this chance to in some way, you know, honor his legacy with this and further it was important to me.
So my dad was Senator Baker's finance chair when he ran for Senate the first time, but he tells a story that, remember, no Republican had, Tennessee's now a really red state, but no Republican had won statewide in a long time. I can't remember the number of years. So he comes to see my dad, and he's saying, I want you to be my finance chair. I'm going to run for Senate, blah, blah. Dad says, I just think he's running for the state Senate. And so I'm thinking, okay, well, you probably got a shot given that district and how it works. And he said, finally, for like 20 minutes, he starts laughing. He goes, oh, you're talking about running for the United States Senate. Because it was just kind of so crazy that some Republican thought they could win. So, you know, in today's environment, I think what it showed is One of the reasons I think Senator Baker was so effective is he had to win in an environment where nobody in his party had won before. And so that forces you to listen and to talk and to try to work out solutions. And if you look at somebody, he becomes the majority leader of the United States Senate. President Baker asked him, he wanted it to be President Baker. Yeah. President Reagan.
A little short, but yeah.
That's right. President Reagan asked him to be his chief of staff, and then he ends up being the ambassador to Japan. So this incredible career from somebody, Senator Baker's daughter's here today. You could fit the whole town of Huntsville, Tennessee in this room we're in, okay? He is a small town guy. And to end up doing what he did, and I think it's all based on somebody that was common sense, a lot of wisdom, and the ability to want to get to the right answer.
You know, I hadn't thought about that before, but I mean, I've just had one of those aha moments. It's you know, when I ran for governor, it was in 2002, and it was right after Al Gore had famously lost the state and lost the presidency, so it was definitely going against it. And so for me, I think it's the same thing you were describing for Howard, which is you definitely cannot just come in there with whatever the Democratic catechism is and think, but needed to you know, figure out some middle ground on that. And it served, I don't know, I feel it served me very well over those 8 years.
Yeah, the other thing I think that this typifies him. In 1978, I was a college junior and came up to be an intern in Senator Baker's office, and I was pretty certain I was coming to save the Republic, and he thought opening mail was a better responsibility, so I opened a whole lot of mail. This is before email, and this is the whole Panama Canal Treaty came up, and which we can barely remember, but it was the hot issue of the day. President Carter proposed it, and you basically measure things by how much mail you got, and I'm not exaggerating. We got, you know, 9,000 letters against it and 5 for it. And so, you know, again, I'm a 20-year-old intern. I didn't exactly hang out with the senator a lot, but the little cars that run between the Dirksen Senate office building and the Capitol, the little subway cars, one time he says, hey, jump in and ride with me. And of course, so I took my one shot and said, I don't get it. Nobody in the whole state's for this. Why are you doing it? And he kind of patiently walked me through why he thought it was the right idea and the right thing to do. And ultimately, you could argue it ended up costing him, maybe Reagan wins anyway, but he ends up being a lot less competitive in the AD primary because of that. But again, I think he'd play the same card again.
I can think of about probably 3 to 4 dozen current senators where jumping in and asking him about a policy position would not have gone super well for you. But that, again, I think underscores who Senator Baker was. I do want to get to a couple of audience questions first that have been submitted online and then open up to the room as well. From Audrey, who asked, who can you point to right now in Congress that reminds you of Senator Baker or gives you hope? It's always great when you realize that they ask better questions than you do as the reporter.
You know, the problem is, I mean, we've really, as Phil said, we're trying to stay away from current politicians because then you get into that, and I could, the minute I give somebody's name, I'm going to think of 10 other people that I should mention. I do think there are people who really are trying to do that. I mean, again, I don't think I'm going to name a name there, but Phil might be bold enough to do that. But I do think there are people who
You've answered that question very well. Thank you.
Another one from online, what's your opinion of money influence in politics? Which I think could be a potential good episode for you guys at some point.
Yeah.
If you're taking ideas.
It's I think it's a serious problem. If I think back, I mean, I'm fairly late to the world of politics. I mean, I spent a career in the business world and so on, and then ran for mayor, you know, well into my life. And I probably, for most of that time, had a kind of a high school civics view of how the world worked. If there's one thing that was totally unlike anything I'd ever imagined, is I never had any idea how much economic interest drove everything. And I just never had any concept of it. I mean, healthcare has been my field, and it's totally screwed up by economic interests. And so on. So, and one of the ways in which that makes itself known is through money in politics. I don't think it really has to do with the direct contributions. I mean, I remember describing to somebody that when I decided to run for governor, and you figure out how much money I need and so on. This was like a year before the election in November. I've got to raise like $150,000 a week, every week, day in and day out, for the next year to be able to be successful at this. And the limit was, I believe, $5,000. So if somebody gave me $5,000, I was very happy. But that was not enough. I mean, that was not even close to something that would drive your behavior, and you felt, you felt indebted to them. I think all of this dark money that's come in and the corporate money that's come in is a real problem, and needs to be dealt with in some ways, certainly through full disclosure and probably through cutting a lot of it off. It really has infected and hurt our political process.
I couldn't agree. I mean, the Citizens United, I'm not a constitutional authority. That might have been the right legal decision. It's been really bad for the country. All of the outside, unidentified money is not a good thing.
I do want to open it up to anybody in the audience who might have a question. Sorry, I'm used to having somebody in my ear yell rap, rap, rap. And we're like running right up against you right now, and I'm just looking around. So if anybody has a question in the audience and would like to ask, please, by all means. Hang on, there's a microphone right here. We'll get you.
My name's Sissy Baker, Howard Baker's daughter. I just want to share an experience and ask a quick question. So when Dad was elected to the Senate in 1966, the first thing he did when we got up here is there was a book with all 100 senators and their pictures. So we cut them out, and I would hold up the pictures so he could memorize all 100 senators' names with their faces before his first day on the Senate floor. And then after that, we became friends with so many Democratic senators. We played tennis together with Jacob Javits, and we had barbecues together with Mike Mansfield, and we were all friends. And the other senators' kids from the Democratic Party and we went swimming together. We were all friends. What happened? And, because they were friends, and, my grandfather was Everett Dirksen, and his best friend was Lyndon Johnson.
Yep.
And they drank bourbon together almost every night.
Frequently.
Right. And so these friendships are what I think constituted the success of the bipartisanship in the Senate. What happened?
I think one of the things that happened is everybody moved home, right? I mean, you grew up part of your time in Washington, and nobody does that anymore because it's not politically advantageous. It's like, oh, he's become Washington, he's moved up there, et cetera. So one of them is that real practical issue of, the minute they recess, everybody's on an airplane home, which in some ways is good, but the result has been you've lost the relationships.
It really happened in the 1990s when there was just a big pressure to stay out of Washington, don't have those friendships. I remember when Al Gore was elected, a man named Harlan Matthews was appointed for 2 years as the senator. He wasn't going to run again, but just for that period of time. And he was a friend, and I've been talking to him sometime, and he said, I got up there, and we had a small group of new people from both parties. We started to get together for breakfast, just to kind of talk about the experience. And after about 2 weeks, both parties just closed it down. You do not do that. Do not do that. And when you lose that ability to, be at the Little League baseball games together and go to barbecues together and stuff, you just lose the whole human component of that.
Senator Leahy has a wonderful story about, as a very freshman senator, I'm going to butcher it, so I'm not going to get the whole thing, but basically being called into Mike Mansfield's office to go meet with them late at night, and then he found out he was going to be the bartender. And it was like all the senators there. Sorry. Anyway, it's a good story. If you ever see Senator Leahy. Yes, sir.
My name's Jim Free from Columbia, Tennessee, but I've been in this town since 1977.
We're willing to give you a pardon and let you come home if you'd like.
I am, as a matter of fact. Ask Jake Wallace. I'm in the Carter White House. I'm a pretty young kid, and the phone rings. It's Howard Baker, who I knew through one of my mentors, a guy named Ned McWhorter. He said, Jim, come on up here for a cup of coffee in the morning. So I did. we had our, how's everybody doing? He said, I thought of something I want to do for you. He took me, went out into the hall, and we turned to the right. So we're headed to the House side. Well, as most of y'all know, senators don't ever go over to the House side. The House side has to come to them. He took me over to John Rhodes' office and into Bob Michael's office. Rhodes was the Republican leader. Bob was the whip. And in both offices, he said, I know Jim Free. I know his people. He's a good guy. He's down there with President Carter, and we're lucky to have him. And he said, if you can work with him, and if Carter's right on the issue, help him. Can you imagine that happening? No. Now, Sissy, I must say, at the end of that meeting, he'd say, and if Carter's wrong, whip him. But, I mean, what else can I say? And the answer to the question about changing and your kids not playing football together, Newt Gingrich did that.
Yep. I think we got time for one, maybe two more. Be pushing it, might get thrown off stage. Please.
Hi, my name is Leah. I work in development here at the Bipartisan Policy Center. Governor, you mentioned that you like the idea of Congress and public service as something that's accessible to everybody, that somebody could come and serve for a few years and then go back to their lives. But it seems now that it's really hard for the so-called common man to break into politics in any way. What do you think that, or why do you think that is, and how do you think we solve that to make people feel like they have more of an impact in politics?
I think it is harder than the founders ever imagined for the common man to break into politics. A part of it is money. It's just, it is so much money that's now required. The amount of money that's being spent on campaigns is obscene. There's no other word to describe it. And I think also the way in which the press interacts with that process makes it unattractive often for people to do it. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to, particularly when I left the mayor's office, who I thought would be good mayors. I would talk to them, and they would love to do the job, and they had no desire whatsoever to go through the process of, disclosing everything in the world about their life ever and being subject to all that stuff. So I think that the two of them combined have probably hurt that idea. Maybe it'll come back.
I would say this, though. I honestly do believe this. There is still room. If you want to get started in politics, go run for local office. It does not cost that much. And I always say 20 great local volunteers beats $200,000 any day of the week, okay? And you have a passionate group of people who believe in you. Start out, run there, do well, people know your name. I don't think there's that obstacle to people getting into politics. Now, if you want to just out of the blue run for the United States Senate, yeah, that's probably true. But if you want to go run for county commissioner or school board where we need a lot of good people, have at it. I think the field's open.
Well, in that comment, I was talking about the Congress specifically, and so on. And I think it's a matter of it costs so much and it's so painful to get there that it just becomes something
The
like
personal
you can't
pain
give
part
up.
is real.
The reporters are the worst. I realize there's perverse incentives here. I have to go back to work. You all get to go eat Tennessee barbecue, which is why I'm lingering a little bit. But I do want to close with this because we are over time. And I'm co-opting a question that was asked from online. In this process or in the process since you've been out of office, have you looked back at a decision you made while you were governor and said, either A, that wasn't the wrong decision, or B, I wish I would have had more information that may have informed a different decision?
I can certainly think of wrong decisions that I revisit. One that comes immediately to mind is I spent a lot of time on education, as you did. I got very caught up in this notion that everybody ought to be college ready, that even if you weren't going to college, those were the skills you needed to get a good job. I was wrong. That's not how the education system should function. And I think I came after I left to the feeling of saying, no, it really is, every child has some God-given set of strengths and weaknesses, and the point of the education system is how do you make the best use of that to give them the tools they need to be successful in life? And I was just dead wrong about that.
One of the things about being a governor is you're running this business that's doing everything from building roads to educating four-year-olds and PhD students to running a prison system, et cetera, and all of a sudden you come in and you get sworn in, and 2 months later you got to turn in your first budget. And you have all these decisions that impact so many lives. And I'll be honest with you, my only contact with the state of Tennessee prior to being governor, an official role, was getting a driver's license and might have gotten pulled over a time or two by a state trooper. Okay, but I don't.
Give me specific dates in case you run for office again.
Well, the real truth, if you don't have time, but I actually rear-ended a state trooper at the age of 23, which
Nice.
I'm hoping it's out of the system now. But anyway, you know, you got this huge human services department, this is a big corrections department, and that was a foreign world to me. And I so wish I had, and I'm making big decisions earlier, and budgets are hard, you gotta balance them. It's not Washington, you gotta balance them. And I wish I had more time to understand, here's how this process works, here's how we're doing it well, but we're impacting, you know, millions of people's lives, and I didn't know enough to be making all the decisions I had to be making at that time. So a lot of it would be go back and, like, you know, figure out some way to deep dive into all these places that impact so many people's lives.
On that note, and with that candid response, it is a really, really good listen. And I appreciate you guys taking the time. More than anything else, I appreciate you guys letting me come up and talk to you guys today. Thank you, everybody, for coming in. And I can't stress enough, I have a 4-month-old and several other children, but this was how I was putting my 4-month-old down last night, was listening to you guys. And it was great because I just turned it up and couldn't hear anything she was screaming about. But no, it
So wait,
is.
we're noise to go to sleep by.
No. You were. No, I was not putting on for her. She had her noise machine. It was for me. But the guests are outstanding. The topics are fascinating, and the conversation is really great. So, listen to the project. But most importantly, thanks guys so much for coming.
Thank you for doing this. We really appreciate it.